I'm Amanda Palumbo, an AmeriCorps member serving as the Forestry Outreach Coordinator for the Vermont Woodlands Association. We are a member-based network of woodland owners and managers from around Vermont. We work to educate and advocate for the stewardship, use, and enjoyment of our private forests through programs like today's webinar, walks in the woods, and full-day workshops. Some logistics before we get started. The webinar is being recorded. Your mic is muted, but we'd still like to hear from you. Please use the chat if you have any questions. You're welcome to turn your video on, but remember the webinar is being recorded. This webinar was approved for one SAF continuing education credit. To receive credits, please complete the Google survey at the end of the webinar. And this is our climate forestry series, a monthly program where we discuss climate change, mitigation, and adaptation with field professionals. I'd like to introduce our presenter, Savannah Ferreira, Forest Health Specialist of Forest Parks and Recreation.
Hi, thank you for having me today. So here I'm talking about the management guide for Eastern Hemlock conservation in the state. And before jumping in, I just want to acknowledge that this is a collaboration with members of FPR, UVM Extension, Fish and Wildlife, and the Adelgid Project. So I want to set the stage with a reminder of hemlock's importance. Eastern hemlock is a native tree to North America, where its range spans from Canada to northern Alabama and Georgia, and is actually present in 29 US states. This is a slow-growing tree, and it can take somewhere between 250 and 300 years to reach maturity, and we even have records of hemlocks living more than 800 years. Eastern hemlock is shade tolerant, and it prefers to grow in moist and well-drained soils, such as stream valleys, swamps, and on northern and eastern mountain slopes. So Eastern hemlock is considered a foundational species in our eastern forests because it's locally abundant and regionally common. Hemlock structure and functional characteristics create microclimates and habitats for a range of species, which include, but are certainly not limited to, white-tailed deer, snowshoe hare, porcupine, brook trout, and salamanders. The northern extent of Eastern hemlock's natural range coincides in a great part with the homelands of the various Abenaki peoples. This slide is a brief and partial compilation of Abenaki cultural relations with Eastern hemlock provided by the Adelgid Project. So there's several ethnobotanical uses known that include infusions and teas to treat rheumatism, itchiness, and scurvy. Hemlock's high tannin bark is used as a tanning and dye material, and its dense foliage was used to add comfort to bedding and protection to shelters. Among the Abenaki, hemlock is a participant in intersectional communities, and their presence in health leads to the presence and health of other medicinal and otherwise significant organisms, such as the partridge berry and the hemlock reishi. Eastern hemlock is also significant to Vermont's economy. Eastern hemlock is one of the most abundant tree species in our state, with a total estimated stumpage value of $186 million. Although it does rank third in species by saw timber value and growing stock volume, hemlock products are in lower demand than other softwood species, mostly due to its uneven texture, ring shake, and a lack of decay resistance. There are still a few markets for hemlock, and this includes pulpwood, mulch, dimension lumber, and construction and landscape timbers. Hemlocks also provide several non-market values, which include wildlife habitat, ecosystem services, and recreation. Vermont tourism is one of the largest industries we have in Vermont, with over 13 million visitors each year. So although not all of the tourism in Vermont is centralized around these hemlock stands, if we lose a keystone species, this could have a rippling effect on our local ecosystems. And forest types where Eastern hemlock is the least prevalent tree species, the loss of the species may just have minimal overall impact on the economic significance, and it would likely just be replaced with a more locally prevalent tree species. However, where we have habitats where hemlock dominates, or maybe is a significant species in the forest type, that loss of species could lead to a forest cover type shift, and then a reduction in both your market and non-market values. So now that you know why hemlocks are important, let's talk about why trees and why hemlocks decline. So trees don't just typically die one day. There are a variety of factors that contribute to a tree's demise. So this is a picture of Mannen's disease decline spiral, and is a really good tool to show how your abiotic, which is your non-living, and your biotic, which is your living factors, compound each other to speed up the rate of tree decline and mortality. So first, we have predisposing factors. This is the outer ring. This is usually abiotic stressors that stress out the tree and then reduces the ability of the tree to withstand injury or biotic, aka living attacks. So predisposing factors can include, but are certainly not limited to, genetic potential, poor soils, climate change, and air pollution. In Vermont, our hemlocks have shallow root systems, so they have low moisture holding capacity, they're facing climate change, and these things are just stressing out the tree. The next spiral in this picture is representing your inciting factors, which is either abiotic or biotic event that causes the first symptoms of decline. This is going to include things like defoliating insects, excavation, drought, and frost damage. In Vermont, we've had droughts, we've had floods, we've also had defoliating insects such as spongy moth, which can come and also defoliate hemlock. So this is also speeding up the rate of decline. Contributing factors is the last spiral here, and it just represents further damage to an already stressed and low vigor tree. Opportunistic insects and fungi really easily establish and thrive in weakened hosts. And in Vermont, an example of this would be our native hemlock borers. Now, it is possible that trees can die from inciting or predisposing factors. This is just a tool, and it's just showing how things can compound if a tree is surviving these stressors. So for example, as climate change increases, the stress it's going to cause to the tree is also going to increase. We may face more droughts, and therefore the tree could die well before ever getting to contributing factors. So here's a glimpse of all the biotic stressors that we discuss in our management guide that can contribute to hemlock decline and mortality. Unfortunately, I don't have time to talk about everything that we have on this slide today, although I'd love to. This guide goes over defoliators, sap-sucking insects, wood-boring insects, foliar pathogen, shoot blight pathogens, and several decomposers. What I would like to focus on today is hemlock woolly adelgid. Now, unfortunately, hemlock has been in a state of decline in the United States, especially in the southern regions for the last several decades. This is primarily due to the population explosion of hemlock woolly adelgid, or HWA. And this was brought into the eastern United States, into Virginia in 1951, and then unfortunately into Vermont in 2007. Hemlock woolly adelgid is primarily dispersed by birds, but also by wind and much longer distances using human-assisted transport. Here's a map of the distribution of hemlock woolly adelgid in the United States, as well as where it's found in Vermont. On the map to the left, notice that hemlock woolly adelgid spans almost the entire southern range of eastern hemlock. However, it's only present in the lower 3 counties of Vermont. In 2024, we unfortunately added 4 new towns in the northern leading edge of our Vermont distribution, and this includes Londonderry, Windham, Chester, and Cavendish. So here's what hemlock woolly adelgid looks like in the field. For the majority of the winter and the spring, you can see this white cottony ball at the base of the hemlock needles. The insect, which is black, is covered in this woolly protective coating, and this is used to shield the soft-bodied adelgid from harsh weather and predators. Once an infestation is established, you can look for yellowing needles, premature needle drop, dieback, and really thin crowns. Hemlock woolly adelgid can affect all life stages of hemlock, and it will typically kill trees within 4 to 12 years, depending on the severity of the infestation and other compounding factors. Eastern hemlock has vulnerabilities to several abiotic natural disturbances, including drought, wind, and fire, which unfortunately contributes to having an adaptability score of 2.7. And for some perspective, that's the 3rd lowest score of all of our Vermont native trees. So just in summary, eastern hemlock is just not predicted to do well with climate change. So with climate change, we're predicted to see increased temperatures, increased rainfall, and an increase in extreme weather events across the country. Increased temperatures will allow for higher rates of evaporation, evapotranspiration, and this is going to cause an increased need for water. This is going to reduce soil moisture and stress out the tree. Rainfall is expected to increase with climate change. However, the rainfall pattern is going to be much more sporadic. Although we may see higher yearly rainfall, this rain may come in large quantities in a short amount of time with extended periods of drought between them. Drought events are a contributing factor and can lead to tree decline. We're also likely to see an increase in extreme weather events, including flooding, like we saw this summer, fire, and high wind events. These are going to damage and stress the trees and again, decrease the overall health and vigor, which just makes them a really suitable habitat for other insects and diseases to become established. So if you look at this picture here, this is a migrating state climate example showing what Vermont's temperature and humidity might feel like over the next century. So the red arrows is a high emission prediction and the orange is a low emission prediction. So if we have low emission progression, our summers are going to feel like summers in Ohio and West Virginia. However, if we have high emissions, it's going to feel a lot more like Tennessee and Alabama. So if we switch gears back to Hemlock woolly adelgid, again, here's the current distribution of Hemlock woolly adelgid and hemlock in the eastern United States again. And if we compare that to the distribution with the state migration map I just showed, you can see that over the next century, our Vermont climate is going to be more similar to the climates where Hemlock woolly adelgid has been infested for longer periods of time, meaning that more of Vermont is going to become a favorable habitat for Hemlock woolly adelgid. So what may be becoming apparent is that winter temperatures are currently limiting the spread of Hemlock woolly adelgid, not only in New England, but in Vermont. The exact temperature is still being researched. One study has shown that temperatures up to 23 degrees Fahrenheit could limit the spread. And although this does reduce population spread, they still need much colder temperatures to be killed. The same study showed that some temperatures between -4 and -13 degrees could significantly decrease the number of intact cells within Hemlock woolly adelgid, meaning that many of them did die, but we still had some cold tolerant adelgids staying viable. And we actually needed to get down to temperatures between -22 and -33 for at least 2 hours to see the most or significant mortality in the study. So this means that new infestations and populations are going to be found following years with mild winters. So as a state, we do winter mortality population surveys to see how many Hemlock woolly adelgid have died. According to our historic data, we need about 90% winter mortality to prevent range expansion. And as you can see from this graph, we've been well below this threshold for the last several years. So we are anticipating a spread. Hemlock woolly adelgid, again, is more efficiently killed by these sub-zero temperatures, but there is newer research that's starting to look in the larger temperature fluctuations that we see in February and March, as well as summer mortality that might be killing otherwise surviving Hemlock woolly adelgid before they're actually able to reproduce and spread. I hate to be the bearer of bad news as well. I just did our winter mortality population surveys yesterday and was unable to update this graph in time, but we're looking at about 39% mortality for this year. So it dropped significantly from last year. We also do annual Hemlock woolly adelgid surveys in non-infested towns and counties to try to delimit the known infestation, especially when we're seeing this low winter mortality. We do have a few long-term monitoring sites and infested stands where we observe canopy measurements. This led to our 4 detections in 2024, which again were Londonderry, Windham, Chester, and Cavendish. Now, unlike most invasives, we do have a suite of tools to help manage populations, and I'll discuss the following 3. We have insecticide treatments, which can help maintain the health of infested high-value trees, but they don't provide long-term protection, and you do need to keep repeating treatments. Biological control or biocontrol, and this is using pest populations, reducing pest populations using natural predators. The goal of biocontrol releases is not necessarily to eradicate Hemlock woolly adelgid, which at this point is considered impossible in the United States at this level of infestation, but just to establish a self-sustaining population to help knock down Hemlock woolly adelgid populations and then increase the health and vigor of trees that are infested. And then the third is cultural practices, and this can include both your urban and forestry practices. So horticultural oils are topical contact pesticides that kill soft-bodied adelgids by suffocation. Although this is chosen as a low toxic alternative to other pesticides, there's conflicting information in the scientific literature about the consistency of its control for scale insects, including elongate hemlock scale, which is unfortunately another invasive we do have in the state. To be effective, horticultural oils do need to cover the entire plant, and this typically requires specialized high pressure equipment like you see in this photo here, and is less able to be applied by the regular homeowner. The most common insecticides for Hemlock woolly adelgid management are neonicotinoids, and this includes imidacloprid and dinotefuran. So imidacloprid is widely used for Hemlock woolly adelgid control. It is highly toxic to insects and other invertebrates, and its residues can last for months to years in the soil. This is a systemic insecticide, so it's slow acting, often requiring 3 months to observe hemlock woolly adelgid mortality and at least 2 years following application to see the full treatment effects. The slow movement within the plant makes this treatment ineffective for the treatment of scales, which include elongate hemlock scale if that's also present on your trees. Dinotefran is another commonly used neonicotinoid, and this is used for both hemlock woolly adelgid and elongate hemlock scale. So this insecticide has higher water solubility, so it has greater mobility and quicker action in trees than imidacloprid. This insecticide is not as long lasting as imidacloprid. It's only typically effective 1 to 2 years after application, but it's really quick to knock down populations, and you can actually start seeing results in only 4 weeks. At the time of this presentation, Vermont does allow the tank mixing of both imidacloprid and dinotefran for basal trunk applications to take advantage of the quick uptake of dinotefran and then the long efficiency of imidacloprid. The application method of these insecticides will vary based on your site conditions, such as your soil characteristics, accessibility, and then your proximity to sensitive resources. Hemlock woolly adelgid does have several biocontrols available for use in the United States. The 4 insects here that are outlined in black are native to the United States, and then the other 2 are native to Japan. In Vermont, we release Laricobius nigrinus, although we do have naturally occurring Laricobius rubidus, and that's included here, but it does have minimal impact on hemlock woolly adelgid. It prefers to feed on balsam woolly adelgid and pine bark adelgid, but I just wanted to include it on this slide here because Laricobius nigrinus tends to interbreed with Laricobius rubidus. So since they hybridize, sometimes they can eat hemlock woolly adelgid. Oops. So as a state, we've had little success establishing a Laricobius nigrinus population. And this is mostly because we've only, starting in 2012, as you can see with these numbers, we were only getting very little shipments of these beetles. You do need in the thousands to really help establish a population. So we're hoping these last 3 years of releases, that when we go and try to do our recovery surveys, that we're going to have more promising results. In 2022, we did have 1 partial recovery. We found a Laricobius rubidus, and when we sent it off for DNA testing, it came back with Laricobius nigrinus DNA. So even though we weren't able to find a Laricobius nigrinus at that time, it at least survived long enough to find a mate. So there are several effective measures that can be used to manage hemlock woolly adelgid in your ornamental yard trees. Reducing abiotic stressors on hemlock can increase overall health and vigor of your tree, which allows the tree to have more resources should hemlock woolly adelgid become established. If you're choosing to plant hemlock on your landscape, you can look for hemlock woolly adelgid resistant varieties. Hemlocks that are infested with hemlock woolly adelgid should not be fertilized with nitrogen, because this is going to boost adelgid populations. And the same goes for elongate hemlock scale. Homeowners can reduce the number of adelgids and scale, and then possibly the amount of damage in the tree by actually just mechanically pruning out infested branches. When you're doing this cutting, you want to try to aim for between August and February, because these are when the adelgids are less likely to spread. When possible, it's best to leave your debris from infested hemlocks on site. You can chip them. It doesn't eliminate hemlock woolly adelgid, but the surviving insects don't last for a super long time. If you're cutting the branches to be burned, you should be getting a burn permit from your town fire warden. Other best management practices include cleaning off your vehicles, clothing, and other tools after visiting properties with infested hemlocks, and then removing residential bird feeders between April and August to reduce these bird vectors. Where hemlock woolly adelgid does not yet occur in your forest landscape, there's really no need to alter current forest management in anticipation of the insect. But it should really be kept in mind that hemlock woolly adelgid could affect the stand in the future. We do recommend trying to keep a hemlock component in your woods, and if possible, a high vigor or low stress hemlock component. Significant disturbances can cause tree stress and help predispose them again for these biotic stressors. We don't typically recommend preemptive cutting because there is some known genetic resistance to hemlock woolly adelgid, and if you choose to remove hemlock prior to an infestation, you could be removing these genetics from your landscape. When you're managing hemlock woolly adelgid infested stands, your harvest and removal should be planned between August and February, when hemlock woolly adelgid is the least active. Depending on your stand composition, you may need to prioritize invasive plant management, since they might take advantage of your newly opening canopy gaps. When you're trying to identify target trees for removal in both your urban and forestry settings, you want to look for hemlocks with live crown ratios of less than 30%. And this is what we typically recommend for removal because it's really unlikely that a tree is going to be able to rebound and it will just continue to decline. So if you have a tree with a 10-foot crown, so the base of the crown to the tip of the tree is 10 feet, and you have about 2 feet of live foliage, it's really unlikely that tree is going to be able to rebound. If you're trying to remove maybe hazardous trees or recuperate some timber revenue, you want to aim for about 50% live crown ratio. So when the tree has maybe a little bit more than 50% of their foliage. So in forested settings where hemlock stands are in heavy decline from hemlock woolly adelgid, and where you're not able to do any chemical or biological controls, it's really important to try to initiate regeneration as quickly as possible to maintain the forest ecosystem services and also to try to ward off invasive species establishment. Establishing another conifer species with a similar functional niche may better mimic the microclimate effects of eastern hemlock, but it's not going to replace all of the ecosystem functions that hemlock does provide. It's always most cost effective to manage for species that are already present on the site. But when that's not possible, consider supplementing natural regeneration with underplanting. And then attention should be made to promote conditions that favor the establishment of the desired and appropriately adapted tree species. So I do want to end the presentation with more uplifting notes. So hopefully the next couple slides are a little better. I know this can kind of feel dark and heavy sometimes, but the state has worked with Camcor in the past, which is a seed collection company. We collected eastern hemlock seeds in 2009 and then shipped those seeds off where they were germinated and planted outside of known hemlock woolly adelgid infestations. If and when we get hemlock woolly adelgid back down to manageable levels in the state, we hope to be able to replant those seedlings and get those genetics back in the state. We're also working with the public to identify and maintain hemlock refugia. So refugia are areas that are buffered against dramatic environmental change because of weather, different weather patterns, or site characteristics. Landowners that would like assistance with classification of hemlock natural communities and landowners that may have rare hemlock stands should fill out and submit a natural community survey form, which is found in our management guide. And then landowners that have old forests or state significant natural communities and are also enrolled in UVA may actually be eligible to have hemlock forests enrolled as an ecologically significant treatment area. So that's something you can talk to your consulting forester or county forester about. So if you're a landowner or a land manager with multiple stands and you don't really know how to prioritize hemlock conservation, we did create a hemlock prioritization tool that's part of this guide. And I want to just quickly run through what this looks like. So at the top, you have a category, selection reason, explanation, a recommended score if you can't score independently, and then possible scores, which are from 0 to 3 with explanations on what qualifies for each score. And the properties with the highest scores will be your highest priority. So we start with stand traits, and this includes hemlock density in the stand, the presence of invasive plants, and then other insects and diseases. We then have aquatic ecosystem values where we look for significant or at-risk water bodies. Terrestrial ecosystem values focuses on rarity aspects, which include your old stands, your rare species, and or your hemlock dependent species. Cultural values focuses on historic and or cultural resources and also recreation. Then lastly, we look at sustainability, which focuses on refugia, stand isolation, and treatment feasibility. And once you have the scores for each property, you then enter them into the matrix and it's going to rank your properties by priority. Forest Parks and Recreation use this tool to find 3 locations for hemlock conservation areas as part of this conservation effort, because we really wanted the state to serve as a model for hemlock conservation. These sites will be used to conduct field tours and showcase different conservation strategies based on management goals for the public. So the state of Vermont is designating Jamaica State Park, Bombazine State Park, and West Mountain Wildlife Management Area as Hemlock Conservation Focus Areas. And these will just serve as demonstration forests, which apply various silvicultural, chemical, and/or biological control management techniques that we describe in our Hemlock Conservation Management Guide. So here's my contact information if you wanted to reach out. If you think you've seen Hemlock woolly adelgid in Vermont, please report it. You can reach out to either myself directly or use the VT Invasive report it feature. That email comes to me as well. And with that, we did move really fast because of time constraints. This is what our management guide looks like. If you type this in on Google, and I'm